I will be reading an article written by David Hundeyin, published on West Africa Weekly. The title of the article says, Bola Ahmed Tinubu from drug lord to presidential candidate, from Gary, Indiana to Abuja, Nigeria via a stopover in Chicago. Here is how the bagman for a 1990s Chicago drug ring has become a frontrunner for Nigeria's most powerful office, and then some. The article starts with a quote that says, "The 1990s were a crazy time. John Kelly, White House Office Chief of Staff 2017 to 2019. On October 11, 1990, federal agents from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) knocked on the front door of 460 Taft Place in the city of Gary, Indiana. Once a booming steel town with a population approaching 180,000 in 1960, Gary was one of the cities and towns across the U.S. suffering from a severe population loss, amongst other adverse effects of overseas competition on their mainstay industry. From having over 30,000 employees at its peak in 1970, the city's main employee, U.S. Steel Gary Works, retained just 6,000 employees in 1990. In these circumstances, this city and its 77% African-American population were witnessing explosive growth in one of the few industries guaranteed to boom in response to such difficult circumstances. 42-year-old Lee Andrew Edwards was one of the entrepreneurs who had found a place in heroin trade, and by all accounts, he had done very well for himself. With the proceeds from his illegal business, he had bought 2 residential homes, including 460 Taft Place, an apartment building, a liquor store, and a new car, all paid with cash. According to a court record from the United States Court of Appeals 7th Circuit, the DEA agents arrived at the property to execute a search warrant after a 7-month FBI investigation involving Edward's brother Jimmy implicated him as a narcotic kingpin of Gary. Edward did not open the door for the agents, who were forced to break into the house. He instead fired 3 gunshots at them after he surrendered. DEA agents found weapons including a carbine rifle, thousands of dollars in cash, drug pepping equipment including a triple beam scale, and several grams of cocaine and heroin powders in the house. He was later sentenced to life in prison, but not before something about his business operation came to the fore. Subtitle: 2 drug dealers and an accountant, a partnership begins. Federal investigators had determined that Edward heroin supply came from a Nigerian drug dealer in Chicago called Abiodun Agbele. Abiodun had earlier agreed to work for the feds in exchange for lighter sentencing, and as a part of the plea deal, he revealed everything he knew about the heroin trade in Chicago. Located at the junction of 4 states with combined population exceeding 27 million at the time, Chicago was a key trafficking hub in the American heroin trade, and as it turned out, the wholesale trade of an especially potent form of heroin from Southeast Asia Sea in 1990s, Chicago was controlled by a Nigerian criminal gang. The following excerpt is taken from the January 2001 Illinois Drug Threat Assessment published by the U.S. Justice Department National Drug Intelligence Center. In quote, "Nigerian criminal groups are responsible for wholesale distribution of most of the sea heroin shipped into Chicago. Sea heroin, which is 80 to 90% pure, is being sold between Nigerian traffickers for $80,000 to $110,000 per kilogram. Wholesalers in Chicago usually sell heroin without cutting it to minimize their handling of the product and their exposure to law enforcement." Agbele himself was no criminal mastermind. However, he testified under oath that honors belonged to a man who went by the name of Adeboyega Moise Akinde, who was apparently his uncle. Shortly after Agbele's arrival in the US, Akinde had taken him under his wings and showed him the ropes of wholesale heroin trafficking. When Akinde returned to Nigeria in the mid-1990s, Agbele was left in charge of selling regular heroin shipments from Nigeria to Lee Edwards and delivering the profit to his uncle. In the meantime, the Nigerian-led heroin trade Chicago fed an addiction epidemic that became so bad that it changed local health and law enforcement practices, for the first time providing addicts with free access to safe syringes and needles to ensure that they did not share and possibly spread HIV, became a core focus of the public health policy. In other words, sea heroin from Nigeria was so potent and addictive that public health policies in Chicago shifted away from trying to make heroin addicts stop using altogether and merely ensuring that they used safely. One notable organization that did such outreach work with heroin addicts was the Chicago Recovery Alliance, CRA. I reached out to its current executive director, John Werning, to get a sense of how the heroin epidemic changed law enforcement practices from the 1990s to date in Chicago. His comments were predictably grim. In quote, heroin of course has consequences, right? But I think we would probably say that the more major impact in the draconian law around how heroin was policed. I think that it's pretty well established that there was a specific targeting of folks who use drugs generally, but also heroin in particular, and it was mostly targeted towards the policing of black and brown communities. That's not specific to Chicago. But in general, I think there was a lack of compassion by government entities to give people access to the treatment that they needed or non-violent drug possession and mandatory minimum sentence. I mean, there's a ton of different aspects of this that absolutely eviscerated populations, particularly marginalized population in Chicago, and that's probably the advocate's view on this. Now, whether or not that can be translated into a comment about international drug trade and specifically from, you said, Nigeria, I just don't know, but that's definitely more like domestic politics than international. While all of this was going on, an interesting subplot was taking place in the background. An accountant living in Chicago area who worked for Mobil Oil Nigeria was declared monthly income of $2,400, had just deposited over $1.4 million in the bank. He had no known source of income apart from his day job. But he had become friends with Akinde and Agbele, discovering one key piece of information in the process: drug dealers need accountants too. Soon, he would find himself holding and wiring money on behalf of a Nigerian heroin gang in Chicago. Fast forward a bit to January 1992, and he would find himself at the subject of a US federal investigation. Fast forward a bit further into the same year, he would successfully run for office in Nigeria as a senator for Lagos West. Then, another politician said to have ties to international drug trafficking would successfully run for the president in Nigeria on a controversial all-Muslim ticket in 1993. The election would be annulled, the politician jailed, and ultimately another Nigerian military coup would take place in 1994. The accountant would find himself exiled and working with the National Democratic Coalition, NADECO, to unseat a kleptocrat military dictator. Then the dictator would unexpectedly drop dead one day in 1998, followed in quick succession by the jailed politician with the alleged drug links. The accountant would return a hero and successfully run for governor of Lagos in 1999. The kleptocrat dictator Bagman, who helped launder over $4 billion, would become the accountant's new bestie, as an erstwhile Chicago drug lord's loader would start his new lifetime mission of capturing Africa's largest subnational economy and turning it into his personal Aza. A major political opponent of the accountant would end up strangled to death in his bed 10 months to an election, which his chosen candidate would go on to win. Said opponent's son would subsequently be offered a cushy job working for that candidate. He would accept the offer. If you're already struggling to follow this unlikely sequence of events, don't worry, it gets worse. In quote, the 1990s were a crazy time. Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the origin story. The US District Court would seem like an odd place to begin this story, but this is no ordinary story. The main character in this story is an individual whose entire existence is puzzlingly mysterious as it is loud and public. For at least 30 years, Bola Ahmed Tinubu has been at or near the grinding phase of frontline politics in Nigeria. Yet a peek 1 inch below the surface reveals how little is actually known about the man who some say is Nigeria's president in waiting. First of all, there is the age controversy. How old is the man really? What is his real date of birth? Short answer, no one actually knows. Like many Nigerians born into the less than auspicious circumstances that characterize his childhood in Iragbeji, Osun State, he himself may not know. Similar controversies exist around his actual name. A popular theory is that Bola Ahmed Tinubu is an identity he transitioned into at some point after moving to Lagos to live with his surrogate mother, Alhaja Abibatu Mogaji. The only thing every version of his story has in common is that for the first 2 decades or so, he was apparently invincible and unmemorable. There are no childhood friends, classmates, neighbors, or colleagues that remember him. Sometime in the mid-1970s, he somehow materialized at the international airport in Lagos holding a passport with a US visa and a one-way ticket to Chicago in hand. From his arrival in Chicago in 1975, his story becomes easier to track and verify. He first spent 2 years gaining an associate degree in Richard J. Daley College in Chicago. From there, he proceeded on Chicago State University, where he studied accounting, completing his bachelor degrees in 1979. Subsequently, his story appeared straightforward and prosaic. Got a job as an accountant at Mobil Oil Limited in Fairfax, Virginia, got married to Oluremi, and went on to have 3 kids with her. Well after, 3 fruitful indiscretions, shall we say, ahem. In a 2016 interview with The News, Tinubu claimed that his break into the financial big time came at the Big Four consultancy firm Deloitte and Touche, where he supposedly received an $850,000 bonus as a result of his work on a single on-site engagement at the Saudi state-owned oil firm. For anyone with even a passing knowledge of the corporate consultancy remuneration, the categorical dishonesty in the screenshot above needs no explanation. For everyone else, here is a current breakdown of the maximum amount a partner, the highest attainable position, can realistically expect to earn at Deloitte USA. Bearing in mind that the time period in question was sometime in the mid-1980s, $850,000 adjusted for the roughly 2.74% annual dollar inflation rate over the intervening 37 years comes to about $2.3 million in today's money. Even more incredibly, Tinubu claimed that he was awarded such a bonus when he was essentially less than 5 years into his career as an accountant, never mind making partner. While the interview in question contains several other giant fibs, this one stands out specifically because it is the first time in the Tinubu story where he himself acknowledges and tries to explain the fact that he once had a lot more money than a simple accountant. Working a 9-to-5 consultancy job could reasonably account for at that point in his career. This point becomes more important later in this story. In any case, one does not need an economic study or a Glassdoor salary survey to establish that Tinubu was blatantly lying about where the $1.8 million sitting in his account came from. A document whose existence has long been teased and rumored, but never quite properly dissected in the public domain, tells us all we need to know. This document, which was obtained from the U.S. District Court of the Northern District of Illinois' Eastern Division, contains damning information that Tinubu has spent the past 30 years trying to suppress, undermine, and ignore. Uploaded in full and publicly accessible here, the document contains a comprehensive federal indictment and associated case files from July 1993, containing clear and incontrovertible evidence that Bola Ahmed Tinubu was once in fact a bagman handling and laundering proceeds of heroin trafficking for a Nigerian drug ring in Chicago. This is not the first time that the content of this document have been reported, but the stories have not gone into details needed to drive home the point that the man who would be Nigeria's next president is in fact a drug criminal. Tinubu's vast army of media shrills and spokespeople have spun an endless web of narratives explaining why what is written in black and white is all a big mistake or a mischaracterization. One of the most common defenses is seen in the example below. Taking advantage of the Nigerian knowledge gap that typically misunderstands how US federal indictment works and how they differ from criminal convictions, such narratives have been floating around the Nigerian media ever since Tinubu became Lagos State Governor in 1999. Explaining the inefficiency of indictment in the US, H. Michael Schoenberg, founder of the Schoenberg, Colorado criminal defense law firm, says in quotes, "What are the chances for a not guilty verdict if federally charged criminal defendant takes the case to trial? Statistically, not very good. Currently, federal prosecutors tout about a 95% conviction rate. This is primarily due to the fact that most cases never make it to trial. Most defendants end up taking a plea bargain rather than risk a potentially much greater prison sentence, which could be dealt them if they actually went to trial and lost." In other words, America's feds are very good at their jobs, and the likelihood of a federal indictment not being accurate is roughly 5%. Basically not very much. But could TINUBU perhaps have been part of that 5%? And if not, what happened that prevented a conviction? Among the dozens of documents in the case files, there is a sworn statement by IRS Special Agent Kevin Moss, who personally investigated Bola Ahmed Tinubu's financial activities in the lead-up to Lee Edwards' arrest. Here, we reunite with our old friends Abiodun Agbele and Adeboyega Muiz Akinde as we pick our way through our hero's forbidden past. In the interest of brevity, here is a Cliff Note version. 1. The U.S. Attorney from the Northern District of Illinois, Michael Shepard, files the complaint for a forfeiture of funds in the bank accounts held by TINUBU as they hold the proceeds of heroin distribution organization headed by Adeboyega Muiz Akinde. TINUBU's funds represent the proceeds of this operation or property involved in money laundering and the proceeds of narcotic trafficking. Shepard requests that the court adjudge and decree that the funds should be forfeited to the United States. Point 2. Special Agent Moss has analyzed financial documents including bank statements, money orders, cashier's checks, tax returns, and wire transfers of huge amounts of cash generated by individuals who believed to be members of the heroin distribution. And he reaches a professional conclusion that the accounts controlled by TINUBU were involved in financial transactions representing proceeds of drug trafficking. Point 3. The investigation, which began in 1988, has identified Adeboyega Muiz Akinde and his nephew, Abiodun Agbele, as key figures in the trade and distribution of heroin. The investigation identifies a third individual working with the duo to launder their money as a certain Bola Tinubu. Point 4. In December 1989, Akinde takes TINUBU to a First Heritage Bank to open an individual money account. On the application, TINUBU gives his address as 7504 South Stewart Avenue, Chicago, which is the same address Akinde uses as his heroin trap house. Special Agent Moss discovers that Mrs. Oluremi Tinubu has previously opened a joint account at the same bank with Audrey Akinde, wife of Adeboyega Muiz Akinde. Point 5. On January 4th, 1990, just 5 days after opening the account, TINUBU deposits $80,000 into it on a subsequent credit application dated 6th, 1990. TINUBU states that he is an employee of Mobil Oil Nigeria Limited with a total monthly salary of $2,400 and no other source of income. He gives his address as 7504 South Stewart and lists Akinde as his cousin. 6. Despite earning $2,400 a month with no other source of income, bank records from First Heritage Bank shows that over the course of 1990 alone, Bola Tinubu deposits $661,000 into his individual money market account, followed by a further $1,216,500 in 1991. If you're paying attention, then this is roughly equal to $1.8 million he would later claim he made from Deloitte's bonuses and salary deposits. Point 7. When Special Agent Moss interviews Mobil Oil reps about TINUBU's employment, they confirm that TINUBU works at Mobil Oil Nigeria as a treasurer in a capacity that does not involve transfer or custody of large amounts of money. Moss also discovers that TINUBU has failed to file a U.S. income tax returns in 1984. Point 8. On January 10, 1992, a court order is obtained to freeze some of TINUBU's bank accounts containing the suspected proceeds of heroin trafficking in excess of $1.4 million. Point 9. On January 13, 1992, during a telephone conversation from Nigeria with Special Agent Moss, Tinubu admits to the agent that he knows Akinde and that he had previously wired $100,000 to Akinde's account in Houston. Further, Tinubu says that the $80,000 he deposited into the First Heritage Bank came from Akinde. Tinubu also reveals that he had additional accounts in Fairfax, Virginia, and London, UK. 10. Speaking over the phone with Special Agent Moss on January 14, 1992, Tinubu admits that he knows Agbele and he met him through Akinde. Tinubu admits that he associated with Agbele and Akinde in US and Nigeria. In this conversation, Tinubu denies having any additional bank accounts in US. Point 11. On January 24, 1992, following a seizure warrant to freeze over $500,000 of unexplained funds in Tinubu's Citibank account, Citibank discovers 2 additional bank accounts controlled by Tinubu under the name of Compass Financial Investment Company Limited. Citibank account opening a KYC record brings up a memorandum of association and articles of organizations identifying Akinde and Agbele as directors of Compass Finance and Investment Company Limited. 12. Between January 30th and 31st, 1992, Tinubu does an about-face and tells U.S. agent that he has never had any business associations or financial relationship with Agbele or Akinde. This statement directly contradicts his earlier statement and the documents from Citibank and First Heritage Bank. 13. Special Agent Moss concludes in his submission that based upon this evidence, there is a probable cause to believe that number of Tinubu's accounts were involved in narcotic transaction. The court concurs and orders the forfeiture on August 18, 1993. 14. Tinubu opts to fight the case, claiming that the money is legitimate and it belongs to his wife Oluremi Tinubu and his surrogate mother Alhaja Habibatu Modraji. Ultimately, he enters into a settlement with the U.S. government on September 15, 1993, agreeing to forfeit $460,000 of the heroin trafficking proceeds to the U.S. government. The balance of roughly $1 million is released to him. Why did the U.S. authorities adopt this approach instead of going the whole hog and insisting on litigation so as to obtain the full amount? The U.S. Justice Department guidelines for asset settlements to settle cases provide the answer in plain English. In any case, the ascent of Abacha and his rabid anti-American posturing very quickly led to a shift in the U.S. government priorities. Anyone who was on board with Nadeko and promoting democracy in the face of Abacha fascism became an ally. Even if just a few years before, they had contributed to a heroin epidemic on the streets of Chicago. As anyone with some knowledge of the CIA Contra crack cocaine affairs would know, even Uncle Sam can turn a blind eye to drug dealers when they are working in his interest. Also, remember, it was the 90s. The 90s were a crazy time. More holes in the Tinubu story and a cameo from his kids. At the time when Tinubu informed the U.S. authorities that he was a lowly treasurer at Mobile on a $2,400 a month after having apparently been the world's most generous remunerated junior Deloitte accountant, he was doing some decidedly non-lowly things in the background. While working on this story, a bit of research across the U.S. land registries threw up a few pillars like this from the Land Records Department at Prince George County, Maryland. On January 20, 1992, barely 10 days after Agent Moss made first contact with Tinubu via telephone, Tinubu purchased a 4-bedroom, 3,016 square foot at 10111 Limestone Court, Potomac, Maryland 20854. For the merciless sum of $450,000 paid in full and upfront, by the way. This was about 10 days before he did his about-face to Agent Moss, denying having a financial relationship with heroin trafficking buddies Agbele and Akinde. The obvious question raised here is one about timing. Was Tinubu attempting to hide money from the US authorities by packing it in real estate once he realized they were onto him? Where did the funds to carry out this transaction even come from at a time when his accounts were being frozen right, left and center? More real estate record searches even raised more questions about several other parts of the accepted TINUBU story, including his self-characterization as a bedraggled hero of the democratic struggle and the Nadiko movement under General Sani Abacha. In the above-mentioned interview, he claimed that following Abacha's coup and his eventual exit from Nigeria, he was forced to live almost like a pauper after the Nigerian government stripped him of all he had. Describing his weary but triumphant return home from exile, he said, "I came home with 3 pairs of trousers and 3 jackets, but because I gave her notice and some other people noticed that I was arriving, unknown to me, they had mobilized people to welcome me. I was shocked at the crowd when I got to the airport. I was carried shoulder high. That was the day I was totally convinced that Nigeria could be very honest if they care about you, because as they carried me, my ticket, passport and £2,000 fell from my inner pocket. I didn't know they had fallen off because I was carried away by the euphoria of the crowd. I didn't know they got to Sunday Adigun. They told me someone was looking for me, but because people around me didn't believe that danger had finally cleared, they prevented the person. But he insisted that he would not give it to anyone and showed them my passport. So they allowed him and he handed everything to me. Meanwhile, I had no Victoria Island home to return to. It had been taken over by Abacha. They dispossessed me of the house as well as my office on Saka TINUBU Street, my vehicles and everything I owned. They claimed they found bombs in it and dispossessed me of it. I was totally cleaned out. I had only 5 shirts, the £2,000 and the jacket. Before then, Akinyeleru came to America looking for me with 1 briefcase. He was detained for 4 hours by immigration because they were wondering how someone could come to America with 1 briefcase. They didn't let him off until they contacted Mobile and Mobile confirmed him as an ex-employee. He didn't get to my house until 3 o'clock. He told me I had to come to Nigeria even if I wouldn't participate. But he said I should participate. I got back home and each time I moved out, people would shout, "Governor." And yet, the Prince George County Land Record Department would beg to differ because here was our tragic impoverished hero of the Nadiko struggle casually dropping the minimum sum of $147,000 in 1995 for a 3-bedroom, 168 square foot home at 12625 Hillmead Station Drive, Prince George, Maryland 20720. He would go on to trouser a tidy $13,000 profit when he sold it just 3 years later. He was in again in 1997, putting down the modest sum of $491,465 on a 4,558 square foot property at 1708 Parkside Drive, Mitchellville, Maryland 20720, again all cash. He would go on to sell this property in September 2018 for $700,000. What is more, these weird transactions did not end in 1999 or stop with our hero and his wife. Even their 2 youngest children, Habibat Oyindamola Tinubu and Zainab Abisola Tinubu, got in on the act fairly recently. Aged 32 and 30 respectively, 2 of the 3 youngest members of Bola Tinubu's family have managed to escape scrutiny, mostly because freedom of information in Nigeria is still more aspiration than fact. Not so in America, where a plethora of services can pull up all kinds of records, including birthdays, criminal convictions, and real estate transactions, especially real estate transactions, such as the ones where a 25-year-old with no non-employment or source of income was able to pay $2,150,000 in 2014 for a deluxe condo at 55 Berry Street, Brooklyn, New York, NY 11249. Full and upfront cash payments, by the way, no mortgage. Or the real estate transaction where the 25-year-old's 22-year-old sister, who was fresh out of music school, with no source of income, was able to pay $2.4 million cash to buy a deluxe apartment at 225 Hudson Street, New York, NY 10013, using 1-inch thick fig leaf that was a company she herself owned. Bola Tinubu's good fortune, it seems fair to say, could well be genetically transmitted. What are the odds that the only junior accountant in the world to earn $850,000 bonus on a single engagement will turn out to have children who buy luxury real estates in New York for millions of dollars while being unemployed with no clear source of income? Not great, but here we are. Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a man of destiny. In the course of researching this story, a name that kept coming up repeatedly as a comparison to Nigeria's Teflon Asiwaju was a certain Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola. When the Daily Beast took a stab at this story some years ago, a tantalizing hint was mentioned in passing about an unimaginable parallel between 1993 and 2003. I reached out to everyone I could think of with some knowledge of this affair. Most declined to speak, citing unspoken concerns. Only Prof. Gary K. Bush, a notable African political risk analyst and one-time professor of African studies at the University of Hawaii, agreed to say his piece. His lengthy comments went as follows, in quotes: "The Nigerian military on the council were adamant that the Babangida government should never allow Abiola to run for office, and told President Babangida so during the aborted runoff primaries before the election. The basis for their concern about Abiola was information and documentation being circulated in Washington, London, and Lagos of Abiola's alleged ties to drug business. The US in particular had expressed a strong opposition to IBB about the candidacy of Abiola as president, not because of his politics or allegations of corruption, but rather for the evidence they felt was correct about Abiola's alleged drug connections. This issue was raised in the military council on 3 occasions, and Babangida was warned. He refused to take decision until it was almost too late. US Ambassador Lannon Walker and the British Council visited IBB and warned him about Abiola, but Babangida deterred, which made the impact worse as the polling had begun. When he finally decided to intervene and stop the election, he precipitated the crisis of June 12. His friends in the military supported him but felt let down by IBB's lack of decisiveness. While there was consternation in Nigeria about the ouster of Abiola, the major international partners of Nigeria were not upset or concerned because they know what the reasons were for the development. Was the 1993 election annulled because of MKO Abiola's alleged drug ties? Bola Tinubu, for one, would certainly hope not. Not only does he have very real and proven drug ties, in addition to explicitly positioning himself as the assumed successor to MKO as the political leader of Nigeria's Yoruba ethnic group, but he has also picked a Muslim running mate ahead of the next year's election. The only other electoral frontrunner in Nigeria's history to do that was no prizes for guessing. Still, if anyone can manage to avoid having this particular bolt of lightning strike twice, it could well be Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the luckiest politician in Africa. When he needed money to launch a political career in the 90s, after all, he apparently had 1.8 million saved up from bonuses and salary payment as a junior accountant at Deloitte. Very handy. When his chosen successor faced a near-certain electoral defeat in 2007, the more popular front-runner coincidentally turned up dead inside his bedroom in Dolphin Estate, Ikoyi, one of the safest neighborhoods in Nigeria. He had been strangled to death. Naturally, the chosen successor then won the election. Happy coincidence. When he backed a candidate against the incumbent president in 2019, his good friend Gilbert Shagori, the former kleptomaniac bagman, happened to have an excellent relationship with the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She just happened to ignore the recommendation from the State Department and the intelligence services to proscribe Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization, effectively allowing it to gain critical mass and make the government of the day unpopular. His candidate duly won the election. Lucky guy. When a former business partner, Dapo Apara, took him to court over financial impropriety and money laundering at Alpha Beta Consultants, basically his little straw into the Lagos State Treasury, the court became the first court in the history of Lagos to burn to the ground and have its files destroyed. The case has yet to be refiled, which is absolutely coincidental and very regrettable. The 1990s were a crazy time, and the 2020s are even crazier. That is the end of the article. Please do well to read the article yourself. There are a lot of pictures inserted into this article, and it will only make sense for you to read them so you can understand the pictures in the article. Shout out to David Hundeyin for writing this absolutely phenomenal article. Peace out. Bye.